Let's be honest, 99% of us will always have a mess in our homes. We don't have the luxury of being a protagonist on a Marie Kondo Netflix show where there are a team of producers helping make sure that the final product looks amazing. And life is hard. It's busy. Believe me, I know. I have a newborn right now. More on that later. I know I haven't shared anything about that yet. But with a newborn, it's so much easier to develop messes. And we all have stuff going on in our lives that makes keeping our homes tidy difficult. But the problem is the mess still bugs us. It affects our psyche. In fact, there are studies that support the idea that clutter can lead to stress. But I have one solution that's kind of a strategy I've been using for a while. The other night, in the middle of the night when I was doing a night feeding with my baby, it kind of struck me that thinking about this strategy in this different way is super helpful, and it can help us reframe how we approach the clutter in our homes. What this search for a tidy, neat home really comes down to is the idea of a smart mess. And I know that sounds weird, but the reality is most of us do have some kind of pile of stuff in a back corner or even a large mess somewhere in our homes. I know that at least is the case for me, if I'm honest about it. And maybe there are times where the mess is eliminated, but then the mess develops again very quickly. A key part of this is accepting that there is a mess and that there very likely will always be a mess or some kind of new clutter area developing. And really what it comes down to is the mess in service of you? Is it the kind of mess that isn't so intimidating, isn't so overwhelming that you can handle it later? Is the mess actually helpful to you in some way that makes certain things more doable in your day-to-day? And can you make sure that the mess doesn't become overwhelming and impossible to tackle? So I have 7 questions that I try to ask myself at least to make sure that the mess is in service of me and that it's a smart mess. So the first question I ask myself is the mess strategically placed? Where the mess lives makes a big difference on how the mess impacts your life and your psychology. Is it in a super visually apparent place, a place that you see all the time? Because often if you have a lot of stuff in your visual area, it will be subconsciously affecting you, kind of screaming at you, hey, you got to deal with me, you got to fix me, you got to put me away, whatever it is. If it's constantly in your face, it's going to stress you out. Am I not inviting people over to my home because of the location of the mess? Could I strategically move it to a place where it's a little bit more out of the way? Does the location of the mess make it harder for me to do things? For example, is it on my kitchen counter and it makes it harder for me to cook, so I avoid cooking? Those are the types of things to think about, because sometimes if you just change where the mess lives, it makes it that much more handleable. It doesn't stress you out as much. It's something that, obviously you should attend to and deal with, but maybe it doesn't have to impact your life so much. And I think this is especially common because sometimes the mess piles up where we spend the most time. We're dealing with stuff and we just leave it where we're doing things. And so then it piles up in the central part of our homes where we actually live. But if we don't have the time to actually clean something up or put it back where it goes, but at least we can put it a little bit more out of the way, it might actually improve our quality of life and the overall feel of our space. I'm not saying you want to start stashing things in a place where it builds up forever. Obviously, you need to deal with the stuff eventually, but I do think sometimes we forget that when we let things pile up right in our faces, they're just going to stress us out more. So just putting them a bit out of the way at least can make a difference. A second question I ask myself is it physically set down in a way that makes me able to deal with it pretty easily later? If I toss it in a weird orientation, or if I don't kind of half at least fold it, if it's just crumpled up together and it's taking up a lot of space, or if it's set in a location that's hard for me to reach, is it going to make it harder for me to actually clean up this mess later? Because the whole point of messes in our homes is that eventually we want to deal with them, we want to face them. But when they're in transition, are they being stored in a way that is super haphazard and difficult to approach later? Because sometimes how the mess is literally put makes it more intimidating to come back to. So for example, if I have a bunch of clothes that I need to fold, but I just can't deal with in the moment, do I just toss them in the middle of my bed kind of all over the place? Or would it be better to put them in some kind of bag or receptacle or hamper that keeps them tightly packed together and also makes it more doable for me to bring with me to a place where I can fold them? Another one is, am I stashing a mess on a really high back shelf, or am I putting it down low where I can reach it and where it's not in the middle of my room, but it's still in a place where I'm more likely to encounter it, so I'm more likely to deal with it. A third question is, can I make the mess take up less space, especially in an easy way? Sometimes when we throw messes to the side, they are just spread all over the place and we're not being thoughtful or intentional about how we're placing the mess. If it's spread all over a kitchen counter as opposed to in one segment of the counter, it does affect how we deal with the space. Sometimes if we're just a little bit more thoughtful about piling things together or pushing them closer in one space, the mess itself can start to feel less intimidating and more tackleable. Like last fall, I think, I did a big clean out of my garage. And I think part of what was so intimidating about it was that there was a lot of stuff just haphazardly put on top of each other, and it wasn't packed in a thoughtful way, and it seemed like there was a lot more there even than maybe there really was. And so I think sometimes just reducing the volume of our mess can make us more likely to deal with a mess. So I think part of this is when we're developing the mess to be a little bit more mindful, to be in the moment, aware of what's happening while we're moving around our space. I know when I'm doing an activity, if I have in the back of my mind, this could produce a mess, let me just think about how I'm interacting with the space, I'm more likely to create a mess that is more kind of thoughtfully placed and that will take up less space, and therefore it's also going to be a mess I'm more likely to deal with sooner. A fourth question I ask myself is, before I add an item to the mess, could I eliminate it? So basically, could I declutter it? I think so often we just automatically throw something into a mess pile because we just don't want to deal with it, but quite often it's something that we could just throw away or recycle really quickly and never have to think about again. When we're going around in our day-to-day life, we forget that we have the power and the autonomy to eliminate stuff from our space, even when it's not like we're in a decluttering session. I think changing our mindsets around when we declutter and how we declutter can make the messes in our space far less overwhelming. Because if I'm dealing with something that's, say, broken or that I know I'm not going to use in the future, the mess will become smaller and therefore more handleable. And again, I think for me at least, it's about remembering to be mindful. Instead of zoning out and thinking about other things when I'm in an activity, being really in it and really present in the moment and aware of what I'm doing. If I have a broken object in my hand that I know I'm never going to use again, maybe there's a better strategy than just putting it back in the shelf. A fifth question I ask myself is there a time in my week when I can strategically tackle the mess? It's when we avoid them, when we don't deal with the messes, that they become overwhelming and just impossible to deal with, and where our homes really start to feel like a total mess. So I think it's just about finding those little pockets of time regularly in our lives to deal with the mess. A sixth one is the mess getting too big? And this is related to the last one. Am I avoiding the mess? If it's getting too big, I have to be honest with myself sometimes. I have let it go too far. And that's okay. We all do that sometimes. That's the whole point of this, is that sometimes the mess seems to have a mind of its own and it feels like it's just too much. But I think it's catching when the mess starts to get too big before it gets impossible that makes it more likely that we're actually going to deal with it. So part of this might be thinking to myself, where in my home has the biggest mess right now? Which mess is getting out of control? And which one do I really want to tackle first? It's about prioritization. And then the seventh and final question is, what is more important to me than this mess? And maybe it's my sense of self. I think sometimes we feel so much pressure to have a perfect home that we just constantly feel terrible about ourselves. Especially with social media these days, we see constant perfection. People only show their homes when it looks perfect. But I do want to show, even though I have this channel that's all about tidying and minimalism and that sort of thing, I still have some gross messes in my home that I'm dealing with in an ongoing way. And not only most of us, but the vast majority of us do have messes in our homes. And sometimes I also want to be smart about my mess. I want to pay attention to how I'm reacting to my mess and to be smart enough to say, you know what? I'm always going to have a little bit of a mess in my home, but I'm not going to let it affect how I see myself. I'm not going to let it affect my sense of self-efficacy, the feeling that I can get things done. I'm not going to let it affect my emotions so much that it's really dogging me, where it's really getting me down. Because even if you're at home right now and you look around the room and you're like, it is pure chaos and I can't deal with it, remember that you are worthy as a person just because you're a person. And being smart about our messes means not letting our messes dictate totally our sense of self. Basically, I think it's important to remember that there are more important things in life than having a perfectly tidy home. And probably the vast majority of us are messier than we like to admit or own up to. And so you're not alone. And you don't have to feel shame around your home if it does get a bit messy. Because also shame might reduce the likelihood that you even deal with it. But also, ultimately, there are more important things in life. And I know that this is obvious and it feels kind of superficial to even discuss this, but I really think that shame factor can affect our quality of life. And that's when we're letting our mess dictate our mood and our sense of self-worth. And that is when our mess is becoming really not smart. Having a smart mess is also recognizing I don't have to be perfect. Anyway, I hope that some of these questions got you thinking about your home and your mess at least a little bit differently, because I think sometimes when we're a little bit more accepting of our reality and then we try to make our reality work better for us, we're going to be more successful in the long run than constantly living in denial or constantly holding ourselves to an unrealistic standard. If we have the standard of perfection, of total minimalism and a completely streamlined home, we might just always fail and always feel down on ourselves. But it's about how can I be strategic within the confines of my life, the time that I have, the stuff that I have? How can I be a little bit smarter with my stuff and how it accumulates in my home so that I can make my space work better for me? So I also just wanted to add, if you got this far in the video, thank you. And I wanted to update you personally that I did have my baby. This is the first video I'm shooting after having given birth. It was very chaotic. A lot went not according to plan, and I was in the hospital for a while. It was a wild time. And I know everybody has that experience where it's like not what they expected in many different ways and it goes not according to plan. That's almost the stereotype because that more often happens than not. But I feel like my story and experience was pretty darn wild. I may have to update you all on all of that, but I also want to reassure you, for those of you who have been following me for a while, that I'm doing well. The baby is doing well. I'm just so thrilled to have her. She is so adorable, and I feel like already she's growing and changing every single day. I know that's such a cliche, but now that I'm a parent, I really see how it's true. It's like she's becoming more aware of the world every single day and reacting to what's around her in different ways. And just even the way her eyes move and the way she reacts to faces, it's really incredible to watch. And I'm just grateful to be in that place now. And I also have to say, Andy's been amazing. We've been working together as a team and taking care of this baby. And I'm almost surprised at how much of a team we are. Like, I've always thought of us as a team, but we have just really been functioning as one. And so I'm really grateful for that too. And I know this is a precious time, so I'm trying to enjoy it as best I can. I will definitely have to update you all on more specifics in some kind of upcoming video, so watch out for that. But I wanted to get this video out first because I felt like it was more topical to the channel, and it's just something that I think during this period of not filming and also dealing with a newborn and having more little messes around because of it, it's something that has been stewing around in my mind and I really wanted to share because I think that's helped me in this newborn phase, is this idea of, you know what, I am going to have little messes, I am going to have the pile of dirty bottles, or I will have a little pile of toys, and I can't deal with it all at once all the time. But thinking thoughtfully about how I'm setting things down, about where I'm setting them down, about how I'm interacting with the mess and how I feel about it. Being aware of how I interact with my mess has really made it more handleable during this time. And so I wanted to share some of those principles with you. And I hope it was helpful. I'd love to hear any ideas any of you have about how to be smart about your messes. And right on cue, I hear my little girl starting to make some noises, so I need to go attend to her. That's pretty much all I've got for you. Thank you so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.